Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast in which we explore the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. In this, our fourth season, we're looking at Kenneth Branagh's 2011 film, Thor. I'm Matthew Fox from theethicalpanda.com.
And I'm Andy Nelson from the Next Reel Film Podcast.
And today we're talking about Minute 50, which begins with Loki denying Sif's request to bring back Thor and ends with the Scientists 3 in a library. Joining us on the show today, unfortunately for the last time this week, but hopefully we'll have him back for later Marvel Movie Minutes, once again is Matt Carroll, co-host of the MCUCast, which was the winner of the People's Choice Podcast Award for TV and Film, and founder of the Stranded Panda Podcast Network. Matt, as someone who's talked so much about the MCU, like kind of episode by episode, I'm kind of curious for you, what's it been like doing this kind of minute-by-minute analysis?
It's interesting. There's so much in each minute, but also it's really hard to try to stay restrained to each minute, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, but the thing he says in the next minute is so tied to this. But I really, it's super interesting, and it's a cool and neat way to like break it down and do something different, because there's tons of ways to review these things and tons of ways that podcasts and articles are getting written, and so it's cool to have just a completely novel thing. I like it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for being a part of this, and we're going to get more into that in just a moment.
We are an independent podcast from True Story FM. We love producing this show and talking about Thor and all these other films in the MCU, but it does take time and cost money. Without our members, for whom we are eternally grateful, we couldn't keep it going. Membership means that we can deliver content to you without selling your information and interests through podcast advertising sources. We like our privacy, and we know you do as well. If you're already a member, thank you so much. If you're not, would you please consider becoming one for the season? It only costs $5 a month, or we do offer a discounted price if you join at the annual rate. Visit truestory.fm/Marvel Movie Minute to learn more. Thanks.
Andy, yesterday you kind of pointed out that we were jumping ahead a minute. I have to say half the questions I want to discuss are ones we were already kind of getting into. But let's kind of start there, not to go over the old ground again, but just so Loki starts by kind of explaining his reasoning for, I don't just want to I don't want to change what my father said. And also this is a difficult time and avoiding war. We went into all this stuff last time about how insincere he is, but I just kind of curious, like I've said I'm on Team Loki in this. Do you all agree with him? Do you think it is right to honor what Odin wanted and that we need to be careful in this very fragile time with the Odins? Or is he just clearly he's saying it for his own reasons, but do you think he's right?
I mean, it's definitely an interesting perspective. And I think that there is something about it that does feel accurate, right? The fact that, this is a transition time, we're on the brink of war with Jotunheim, which is because of us, but I'm not going to say anything about that. And the fact that, Odin made this decision, the first thing I'm not going to do is come in and change that. And so I can see that, but also it does feel very scheming. But then on the flip side, it's like, politicians do it all the time. It's like, if he did all of that, I don't think it would be a huge thing. But I think, there is an element of it where he is trying to, especially because it is royalty and he is the, quote, heir to the throne at this particular point in time. I suppose that you do want at least the Asgardians to feel like, oh, he's going to be the next great Odin, as opposed to somebody who's going to come in and just kind of like shake everything up and ruin all the good that was going on.
So we also get an interesting technical thing here that I'm curious about, because I don't think I've seen it at any other point in the movie, although maybe we have. But it's a lens flare, I believe. We get this kind of like a blue line moving across the screen, starting at the bottom first and then moving up, and then a second one kind of closer to the top. Andy, as someone who knows more of the technical side, is that a lens flare? And why do you think we have it in this particular moment?
I mean, it is a lens flare. And it just, anytime there is a potential light that some of the light may not be shining directly into the lens, but or like in frame, but it still can be hitting it. I mean, you could potentially get those lens flares. And it's just one of those cases where it could have been something that the lens happened to be picking up that would have caused the lens flares in that particular moment to kind of shine the way they do here. And they might have seen it and not worried about it. They might have seen it and said, well, crap, we're running long on the day. We can't go back and reshoot it. They might not have noticed until they were editing. in the context of the film, I don't think it's too distracting. You certainly, with some directors now, you really see lens flares quite a bit.
What? Who?
Exactly. Yeah, right. Exactly. So, it's one of those things. I don't think what strikes me as weird with them is just the fact that this is a place where we're not really seeing artificial light. So if anything, it's coming from like the fires or light from outside or something. So that's where it strikes me as like, okay, not where I would have thought they would be getting those sorts of lens flares.
To give him a more gracious thing, like it is something we don't see anywhere else that I know of in the movie. And Asgard is lit very cleanly and brightly most of the film. And here it is lit. It's backlit for one thing, like those fires are behind him, which is what ends up causing the lens flare. So whether it's the backlighting is just causing it or whether they intended it, I think the lighting here is very deliberate in that like something has changed in Asgard, like a dark, sinister presence is now taken Asgard, and you get this like sense of that through the lighting, which I think is what that darkness with the light coming in from behind is what like leads to those lens flares.
I think it's a very good point. And so now we get even more of what we started to talk about yesterday, which Sif is just not buying this. When he finishes saying, like, I'm doing this for the good of Asgard, she leaps to her feet and her friends have to like pull her back a bit. Why do you think it's Sif in particular that is the most upset about this and the most like, I'm not going to take a word of this?
Well, she's certainly the emotional character of the three. She seems to be the one like when they're in the healing room, she's the one who stands up and pleads to Loki to do exactly what they're doing here, right? You need to be can you go to the Allfather and please let him tell him that to retract Thor's banishment. And so again, she's very much kind of reacting. It's kind of her emotions taking hold.
I would also, this is definitely something they probably did not have in mind, although maybe the Loki series, there's a moment where you see Sif, and it's a moment, they're trying to give him a moment of torture to relive over and over. And the moment they choose is when Sif is very mad at him. And I got to imagine for him, that was a moment that Sif stopped trusting him, that Sif, he felt alienated from Sif. And it kind of gives me the sense that like maybe Sif and he had a different kind of relationship before that moment, or possibly that Sif was someone he cared about thinking good of him. And so when she stands up and Fendrel grabs her and pulls her down, I think it's because Fendrel has seen a different Loki than she has seen. Like he has presented himself in one way, but then like maybe Fendrel has seen this sort of darker undertones that seen the depths that maybe Loki could stoop to if given power. And Fendrel grabs her because Sif is like, no, you're doing a bad thing, but I still doesn't think that he will do something to her, maybe violent or whatever, won't actually punish her. And Fendrel thinks he will. He grabs her and it actually reminds me a lot of Selvig holding back, from S.H.I.E.L.D. So S.H.I.E.L.D. is the whatever. Yeah, from previous episode.
Yeah.
And I think you're right about the Loki series moment in that I don't think they were thinking here 12 years from now, we might include a moment about Sif and Loki not liking each other. But both of them are taken directly from Norse mythology. Like Loki cutting Sif's hair in a way that infuriates Sif is something that happens in the mythology. And so neat. I think like so that for them to have that idea that in the mythology, Loki and Sif have a very particular antagonism towards each other, in part because Sif is Thor's wife in the myths and doesn't like that he keeps going off on these crazy adventures with Loki. So yeah, I think like they're kind of both taken from that origin of, Sif cares for Thor in a different way than the Warriors Three do, and we've seen her give little bits of wistful looks. And so I feel like she'd be even more. I think you're right. She'd be even more emotional. She'd be even more protective, and she'd be the first to be like, Loki is not trustworthy.
Yeah, which she was. I mean, she's the one who said he's always been jealous of Thor, right? So she's the one who really starts kind of pointing that sort of stuff out. It is interesting that she really hones in on that. But to your point, Matt, it's interesting how Fandral, he's the one who does recognize that like things have changed now Loki is on the throne. He is king. He just called it out. The two guards, the unknown guards that we have standing here, are doing what Loki's bidding as far as they can tell. And it's like he does recognize, like, you don't rise up and strike a king, right? And you don't want to do something that's going to put you into the dungeons or something like that. And so it's interesting the way that they play here, especially with Fandral and Hogun kind of pulling her back, but then also with Volstagg coming in almost like comedic. I don't know if comedic is the right word, but there is a turn that he has when he kind of.
It was trying to be affable, right? Like he's trying to be
right.
Well, let me approach. So you approach him with anger, you approach him with reverence, and Volstagg's approaching him with this affable nature. Well, Loki, my friend, let's talk about this. And it's like, it's interesting. They all had three take this very different stance.
Well, especially because the one I got from Volstagg is, it's funny, throughout the whole movie up till now, he's kind of been the most like in the wind one. He always seems to agree with whoever's spoken last. And he was the first one to kind of be most respectful. But even here, I kind of feel like he was also the one who was most getting on Loki's case earlier, kind of most teasing him. And to me, it feels like he's kind of like, okay, Loki, you're king. We'll play along. And the way he laughs at, like, if I may, your majesty, like, he's kind of being like, okay, Loki, I'll be in on the joke with you, but we all know it's a joke. And then Loki, of course, just cuts him off and says, it is done. And I thought, again, that's just a great sign of Volstagg, especially, is one of the ones who Sif doesn't take him seriously because she doesn't trust him. Volstagg, I think, just doesn't take him seriously.
It is an interesting reaction that Volstagg has, but also like his reaction when Loki tells him like we're done here, like it's like, wow, okay, that's where we are. Like Volstagg, it kind of really hits him like that's it. Okay, we have to move forward with this as the new king. And I found his reaction like almost a little like there's some contempt that he has now of Loki. It was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I didn't see Volstagg's laughter as laughter of derision or like he's trying to let Loki know he thinks it's a joke. I think that laughter was, all right, this is a strange situation for all of us, but of course you're the king. Right. Like to me, it just fit in with his nature of like, oh, we're I'm the happy drinking warrior guy, like. It seemed more affable of a laugh. It's a very, very fine line though. Like when he starts to laugh, I almost worried for him. And then but he sort of like comes out of the laugh in this sincere place where he's like really with his hands out asking for something. And it really it's such a really beautifully played moment.
Yeah, because the way he says it, like, if I might ask you to consider, it's kind of like when you're like, Mom, make chicken for dinner. And your mom's like, you should be asking. And you're like, okay, Mom, maybe please have chicken for dinner. And then she's like, okay, well, now you asked. That's what it kind of seems like, is that he feels like, okay, if I go through the motion that Loki wants. I also just think we've talked before about how the script has all the Warriors Three, but especially Volstagg, played really just like a buffoon. And Branagh clearly didn't like that. This scene isn't in the script, this moment of Volstagg. And so I just really think like the Warriors Three, but especially Volstagg, Branagh really wanted to take away from the buffoonery, but also, let Volstagg be part of a couple of important moments, which as a rotund, ginger-haired, bearded fellow, I have quite an appreciation for.
I did want to, like, you're talking about the line, and I just wanted to read the actual line as like, if I may beg the indulgence of your majesty. Like, that's like super, like, you got it. You're the king. I'm fully submitting to you,
Right.
Yeah,
it's very
exactly. True. Yeah, I really like the way that they play it. Again, it's also interesting that Hogun says nothing. Par for the course, really. But it's interesting how they are trying to figure out a way to now navigate these new waters, which, to a certain extent, Loki is too, right? I mean, he's just found out that he's a Jotun, and now he's on the throne of Asgard, like all in the course of, a few hours. And now he's kind of like, I think that it's interesting. He's like trying to figure out, what does this mean, and what am I going to do now that I'm in this position? Am I going to wage war on Jotunheim? Am I going to to team up with Jotunheim? Like, what is like? I'm very curious, like what's going through his head at this particular moment.
I think it has to do. I still think it has something to do with his like position of trying to find a place, and he's like, the Jotun are his people. He's just realized, but he also feels the need to like have strength towards them because his people that he was raised with are here, and so it's this weird like almost self-hating thing, you know, when someone like has been taught that his people are wrong all this time, and now he knows he's one of them, which is interesting because then later he has the variant issue in Loki, and it's kind of the same thing. Like everyone thinks the variants are bad, and he has to kind of go like, but wait, we're all variants. Like he has that whole connection.
One thing I'm thinking about is, am I right that in the Loki TV show, we never saw a variant that just grew up as a Jotun, right? Like that, the idea of a universe in which Odin doesn't steal him, and so he just grows up as a Jotun. Like we never saw that, did we?
No, we did in What If.
Yeah, which I haven't seen the last couple episodes of that. So, but I should have seen it. Don't worry about spoiling me for that.
No, there's one episode of What If where he's still like a big blue frost giant.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
The last thing I wanted to say about this part before we'll talk about the 5 seconds in the library and then wrap this up is I just finished watching Squid Game. Very different genre, to be sure, but very, very good. But I watched it all with subtitles, and I was reminded again that like you can have no idea what an actor is saying and still like be blown away by the acting performances. And I just mentioned that because Sif, I think this is some of the best acting that actress does throughout the whole movie. It's without saying a word, you know, because the way she is just staring daggers at him while all this other stuff is happening around her. You know, Volstagg is saying that and then going up, then standing up. Loki is walking down the stairs. It's just such a great acting performance. If you just feel every emotion she's feeling and she doesn't have to say a word to convey it.
Mm-hmm. It's what I love about that moment is, you know, as the Warriors Three leave, and I just as a side note, I was like, well, okay, there's no parting salute. They just kind of walk away, which I thought was a little weird, but whatever. But Sif just stares, and it is a dead-on stare at Loki of hatred, and we get a great close-up of Jamie Alexander doing this stare, which is great. And then what's interesting is we cut back to Loki, and he kind of does this weird thing, and it's a small, subtle movement, but he kind of like lowers his head toward her. Like there's a little bit of like a serpent-like movement, as if he's really trying to focus all of his energy just on hating her in that moment. But just the way that he kind of like almost digs in with the look at her, it's so subtle, but it's such an interesting Loki thing. Before she leaves. I loved it.
So then we cut to just a few seconds in the library. I tried to look up who is this woman in the library, and it turns out that one of the problems I've been finding in doing research for this movie is that because there's no sort of subtitle to it, it's just Thor, that if you Google Thor and woman in library, like I did this deep dive on an actress named Alana Olivia because she's credited as library student in Thor: The Dark World. So not relevant here. I couldn't find who that was.
Well, it's especially tough when you only see them from the back.
Yes, definitely. But it's kind of a fun moment because I think, you know, they never say it, but clearly this is the response to, you know, they took your laptop. He is now, I think we even hear a little bit the email whooshing sound that used to get on like AOL.
Yeah, you do.
Or whatever that is. And so it's just a kind of fun moment. And mostly I wanted to bring this up because in the script, there's actually this thing happening in the library where the kids are having story time and like they're reading a story about Norse mythology. And in the next week, we'll talk about how while they're in there, Erik is going to find a book. But I'm glad they cut that scene because it just seems so cheesy and over the top to have like that be the way that Erik gets to kind of study Norse stuff again.
Oh, so they were reading a book about Norse mythology?
Yeah, like it's story time and they're reading a story. And I think in the script the story isn't necessarily about Norse mythology, but it's something similar. But then they bring up like the Norse myths or something.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Interesting. I did wonder with this minute though. You mentioned that it starts with the kind of Erik sending off that email. You hear the email whoosh. I'm like, oh, is that off to Dr. Hank Pym?
Mm-hmm.
Since we had that little nod earlier.
Yeah, I think exactly that's what he's doing. It's interesting because he's I guess he had to remember that email address. Who knows an email address?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, true.
It's also just kind of a nice thought about how much our opinions about the internet have changed, because today, if you told me that a person was fearful about a secret government agency that knows too much, and so he was going to send an email with a lot of sensitive information to a person who might also be coming to the attention of a secret government agency, and so would go and do it from a completely unsecured library computer, I'd be like, can we talk about security just a little bit here? But back then, I was like, yeah, it's the internet. It's safe.
Well, it's also that they're not necessarily the people who think about that sort of security. These are like scientists who are pretty open about whatever their research and stuff. And that's the thing, is like their research became problematic and S.H.I.E.L.D. shut them down.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Just while we're here in the library, just a quick little tour of Puente Antiguo. This is the Puente Antiguo library. Out the window, you can see the cocktails sign, and you can see that Isabella's Diner is there, which makes me think, in context of trying to figure out where all these things are, that the library is actually in the Greyhound station, that perhaps the Greyhound bus, even though we see a bus earlier, maybe they don't stop here, or they don't have an official station anymore. Now it's just a stop. And now the station has been converted into the library, is kind of my what I'm reading this as. And then also, just to point out, on the wall in here, you see a Read to Your Hero poster hanging up. This is a campaign that the American Library Association had, their Read campaign, which has been running since 1985. They've had hundreds of celebrities, sports people, all on these Read posters. In this particular case, it's a fireman who's reading to his hero, this little girl who's sitting with him. I love that they do this. Interestingly, it started in 1985. Bill Cosby, good old notorious Bill Cosby, he was the very first person who was on one of these posters for their Celebrity Read campaign. And interestingly, Anthony Hopkins has been on one. I'd love to think that they would have hung one of his up on the wall.
Nice.
To create a strange, alternate universe.
Yeah.
And just to give a little plug for one of our former guests, if I haven't got a chance to do it now, I'm quickly looking and not finding it, but I imagine it's in here. If you go to the MCU Location Scout website, mculocationscout.com, you might be able to find where they actually shot this library, because certainly it looks an awful lot like an actual library, but who knows?
Well, I think this is on the set. We're in the town of Puente Antiguo. I think, like I said, this is inside that actual Greyhound building here in the actual, in the western town.
So they just shipped in a bunch of books for it. I can see that.
Yeah, just production design, right? Exactly.
Cool. All right. Well, Matt, it's been so good to have you. Is there any other kind of last comment you want to make, either about this minute or just kind of the 5 minutes in general we've gotten to watch, or this movie in general?
I guess not. It's really interesting, and I feel like I need to go rewatch, because some of the takes y'all have on the way, like just watching this scene, these 5 minutes out of context, is interesting to like try to suss out Loki. Like we were talking about Loki and the Warriors 3, their sort of motivations and stuff. It's really hard to suss that out when I haven't watched the beginning of the movie lately, or at least as close a watch as y'all are doing. So I think this is super cool that you guys are doing this, and yeah, thanks for having me. It was super, super fun, and like getting that close of a read on every scene and like what their motivations are and stuff. It's such a cool, if nothing else, it's like a cool writing exercise, like to break down these movies and see what they were thinking and when they were doing it, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a fun journey. I loved doing it on Iron Man, and I'm glad I'm back in the fold doing it here for this one, just to dig in deep with this movie.
Definitely. Well, Matt, again, thank you so much for being a part of this. For people who really enjoyed hearing you, just give us one more time a quick rundown of where they can find your podcast, your music, all the rest.
Yeah, man. Just strandedpanda.com is everything in one place. But that do a lot of podcasts, Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast being the most applicable. But the thing I would really love if you guys would do is go to Spotify or Apple or whatever and search for Welcome to the World by The Garage. That is my song that is Marvel related. I've got more Marvel songs on the way, but follow The Garage on Spotify, Apple, Google, wherever you get music.
Cool. Yeah, we will definitely check that out. If you're not, MCUCast is one of the most regular podcasts that I've been listening to for a long time. It's so great there. Matt's been a guest on my Superhero Ethics podcast a couple times. We have content coming out about the Orville, which we just heard the release date for season 3. By the time this comes out, will be coming up. I think it's in February of 2022. Is that right, Matt? March?
The Orville is in March.
Okay. So yeah, so we're all of season 1 we have episodes out on. We're going to do a whole bunch more episodes about season 2. And of course, any other, that's where you get great TV stuff, MCU stuff. Definitely check out MCU Podcast. Other films, other film stuff, there's so much great things to find on the Next Real family of podcasts. That's where Andy and Pete and I've done some stuff up there, a whole other great set of people. Check all those out. And then the most important thing I always ask you, have a great day.
Until next time, true believers.
Marvel Movie Minute is a production of True Story FM, engineering by Andy Nelson. This season's music is One Last Ride by Martin Puringer. Find the show at truestory.fm, and if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, consider doing that for this show.